The summer sun blazed overhead as Karen stormed through the park, her designer sunglasses perched on her perfectly coiffed head. Her finely manicured nails clutched a clipboard, and her lips were pursed in a disapproving scowl. Unacceptable, she huffed, marching up to a family setting up a picnic blanket under a towering oak tree. This is my park, and I won't have your kind ruining the ambience. The father, a tall, imposing man with broad shoulders, looked up from unpacking the picnic basket. "Excuse me?" he asked, his deep baritone voice laced with confusion. Karen thrust the clipboard in his face. "This park has very strict rules about the types of gatherings allowed. People clearly don't fit the criteria." The man's brow furrowed as he scanned the clipboard. "I'm sorry, but I don't see any rules prohibiting a family picnic. We have a permit and are following all the guidelines." Karen's nostrils flared, and she tossed her head back in an indignant huff. "Well, I'm the head of the Park Association, and I'm telling you that your kind isn't welcome here. This is a high-end establishment, not some public dumpster for riffraff to congregate." The man's eyes narrowed, and he slowly rose to his full height, towering over Karen. "I see. And what, pray tell, do you mean by your kind?" Karen's confidence wavered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "You know exactly what I mean. People like you." She paused, her eyes sweeping over the family of four. "Don't belong in this park. Now, I suggest you pack up and leave before I have you forcibly removed." The man's jaw tightened, and his eyes glinted with a hint of amusement. "I see. Well, in that case, I'll have to inform you that I'm a civil rights lawyer, and I won't hesitate to file a lawsuit against the Park Association for discrimination." Karen's face paled, and she took a step back, her grip on the clipboard tightening. You can't do that. This is my park, and I won't hollow." "Oh, but I can," the man interrupted, a small smile playing on his lips. "And I will, unless you reconsider your position and allow my family to enjoy our picnic in peace." Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, her mind racing to find a way out of this predicament. She knew she couldn't win against a civil rights lawyer, not without risking serious legal consequences. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Fine," she muttered through gritted teeth. "But I'll be watching you." With that, she turned on her heel and stalked away, her expensive heels clicking against the pavement. The man chuckled and turned to his family, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Well, that was an interesting start to our picnic," he said, his tone light and playful. "Shall we continue?" As the family settled back onto the picnic blanket, a sense of triumph and relief washed over them. They knew that this was only the beginning of their battle against Karen's entitled behavior, but for now, they were determined to enjoy their afternoon in the park, undisturbed. As the afternoon wore on, Karen fumed, pacing back and forth on the manicured lawn, her eyes constantly fixed on the family under the oak tree. She couldn't believe she had been forced to back down, her authority undermined by a simple picnicking trespasser. "This is my park," she muttered under her breath, her nails digging into the clipboard. "My rules. How dare he challenge me like that?" Across the lawn, the family continued their picnic, blissfully unaware of Karen's smoldering resentment. The children laughed and played, while the parents enjoyed the warm afternoon sun and a simple meal together. Suddenly, Karen's eyes narrowed as she spotted a group of teenagers tossing a frisbee not far from the family's picnic spot. A sly grin spread across her face as an idea began to form in her mind. Smoothing down her designer dress, Karen strode over to the teenagers, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Excuse me, young people," she said in her most authoritative tone. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to take your game elsewhere. This part of the park is reserved for quiet, family-friendly activities only." The teenagers exchanged puzzled glances, but one of the boys, a lanky teenager with a pierced lip, spoke up. "But there's no sign or anything that says this area is off limits. We're not bothering anyone." Karen's smile tightened. Yes, well, as the head of the park association, I'm telling you that your frisbee throwing is disruptive and inappropriate for this particular space. Now please, move along. The teenagers hesitated, but Karen's stern gaze and the clipboard she wielded like a weapon convinced them that discretion was the better part of valor. Grumbling, they gathered their frisbee and trudged off to another part of the park. Satisfied, Karen turned her attention back to the family under the oak tree. With a smug expression, she strode over to them, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to pack up and leave. It seems your picnic is disturbing the other park guests." The father, who had been quietly reading a book, looked up with a frown. "But we've been here for over an hour, and there haven't been any other issues. What's the problem?" Karen's smile widened. "Oh, I'm sure you don't mean to cause a disturbance, but I'm afraid your presence is simply not in keeping with the high-end, family-friendly atmosphere we strive to maintain in this park." The father's brow furrowed, and he opened his mouth to protest, but Karen quickly cut him off. Now, let's not make a scene," she said, her tone condescending. "I'm sure you understand. Why don't you take your family and go find another park to enjoy?" The father's eyes narrowed, and he slowly rose to his feet, his towering presence casting a shadow over Karen's petite frame. "I don't think so," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We have every right to be here, and we're not going anywhere." Karen's confidence wavered, but she refused to back down. "Well then, I'm afraid I'll have to call the police and have you removed for trespassing." The father's lips curled into a humorless smile. "Go ahead. But I can assure you, the only one who's going to be in trouble is you." As the tension in the air thickened, the family braced themselves for the impending confrontation, wondering just how far Karen would go to assert her twisted sense of entitlement. The tension in the air was palpable as Karen and the father stared each other down, neither willing to back down. The family watched with bated breath, their picnic forgotten as they waited to see what would happen next. "You're making a big mistake," the father warned, his voice low and steady. "I'm a civil rights lawyer, and I won't hesitate to file a lawsuit against this park if you try to have us removed." Karen's eyes narrowed, her nostrils flaring in barely contained rage. "I don't care who you are or what you do," she spat, her manicured fingers tightening around the clipboard. "This is my park, and I won't have your kind ruining the atmosphere." The father's lips curled into a humorless smile. "My kind? And what exactly do you mean by that?" Karen's confidence wavered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "You know exactly what I mean. You and your family don't fit the image we're trying to cultivate here. You're not the right type of people." The father's expression darkened, and he took a step closer to Karen, towering over her. "I think you need to be very careful with your words, Karen. You're treading on dangerous ground here." Karen's eyes widened, and she took a step back, clutching the clipboard to her chest like a shield. "I won't be intimidated by you. I have the authority here, and I'm telling you to leave. Now." The father shook his head, a sardonic chuckle escaping his lips. "You know, Karen, I've dealt with your kind before. People who think they can use their position and privilege to discriminate against others. But I can assure you that's not going to fly here." He paused, his gaze boring into Karen's. "Now I'm going to give you one last chance. Either you back off and let my family enjoy their picnic in peace, or I'll make sure your little park association is torn apart piece by piece." Karen's face flushed with anger, but there was a trace of fear in her eyes as well. She knew she was outmatched, both legally and physically, but her pride refused to let her back down. "This isn't over," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "I'll be watching you, and the second you or your family step out of line, I'll have you removed. Mark my words." With that, she turned on her heel and stalked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. The family watched her go, relief and apprehension mingling on their faces. "Well, That was certainly an interesting encounter, the father said, turning to his wife and children with a wry smile. But I think it's time we get back to enjoying our picnic, don't you? As the family settled back onto the blanket, they couldn't help but wonder what other challenges Karen might throw their way. But for now, they were determined to savor the moment, knowing that the battle was far from over. As the family continued their picnic, blissfully unaware of Karen's simmering resentment, the woman in question was busy plotting her next move. Pacing back and forth in her stylish home, she tapped her well-manicured nails against the mahogany desk, her brow furrowed in concentration. "There has to be a way to get rid of them," she muttered, her eyes narrowing. "I can't let them ruin the atmosphere of my park." Suddenly, an idea struck her, and a devious smile spread across her face. Reaching for her phone, she began dialing a number, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "Hello, Officer Jenkins. This is Karen Sutcliffe, the head of the Park Association. I'm calling to report a disturbance in the park. There's a family there that's causing all sorts of trouble, and I need your help to have them removed." On the other end of the line, Officer Jenkins sighed, already familiar with Karen's penchant for causing drama over relatively minor issues. "What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Sutcliffe?" he asked, his voice tinged with resignation. "The problem is that this family is completely disrupting the peaceful atmosphere of the park," Karen replied, her tone dripping with exasperation. "They're loud, they're disorderly, and they simply don't belong there. I've already asked them to leave, but they're refusing to cooperate." Officer Jenkins paused, considering his response. "Mrs. Sutcliffe, as far as I'm aware, there are no rules prohibiting families from enjoying the park. Unless they're breaking the law, I'm not sure I can justify removing them." Karen's grip on the phone tightened, her knuckles turning white. "But Officer Jenkins, you don't understand. This family is simply not the right type of people to be in my park. They're ruining the image we've worked so hard to cultivate." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and Karen could almost feel the officer's disapproval radiating through the phone. "Mrs. Sutcliffe, I'm going to have to stop you right there," he said, his voice stern. "Discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or social status is unacceptable, and I won't be a party to it. If you continue to harass this family, I'll have no choice but to file a report against you." Karen's face flushed with anger, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Officer Jenkins cut her off. "Now, I suggest you leave this family alone and focus on maintaining the park in a fair and inclusive manner. If I receive any more complaints about your behavior, there will be consequences. Understood?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin, angry line, but she knew better than to argue further. "Understood," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. As she hung up the phone, Karen's fury threatened to boil over. She had never been denied her way before, and the thought of this family getting away with their destruction was simply unacceptable. With a determined glint in her eye, she turned her attention to her computer, already formulating a new plan. If the police wouldn't help her, she would find another way to get rid of this unwanted blight on her precious park. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the family continued their picnic, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. They laughed and chatted, savoring the simple pleasures of a summer evening in the park. Meanwhile, Karen was hunched over her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she worked tirelessly to find a way to rid the park of the unwanted interlopers. "There has to be something, anything, I can use to get them out of here," she muttered, her brow furrowed in concentration. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and a triumphant grin spread across her face. "Aha! Perfect." Quickly, she began drafting an email, her fingers moving with a sense of renewed purpose. As she typed, a glimmer of satisfaction danced in her eyes, and she couldn't help but chuckle to herself. "Let's see how they like this," she murmured, hitting the send button with a flourish. Back in the park, the family was blissfully unaware of the impending doom that was about to descend upon them. They had enjoyed a peaceful afternoon, the earlier confrontation with Karen seemingly forgotten. But as the sun began to set, the tranquility of the moment was shattered by the arrival of several park rangers, their faces stern and their bodies tense. "Excuse me," one of the rangers said, approaching the family with a clipboard in hand. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to pack up and leave the park immediately." The father, who had been lying on the picnic blanket, slowly sat up, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Excuse me, what's the problem?" The ranger cleared his throat, his eyes darting nervously between the family and the clipboard. "Well, we've received a complaint that your picnic is in violation of several park regulations. Apparently, you don't have the proper permits and are disrupting the peace and quiet of the area." The father's eyes narrowed, and he rose to his feet, his imposing presence towering over the ranger. "That's simply not true. We have a valid permit, and we've been nothing but respectful of the other park guests." The ranger shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I'm sorry, sir, but those are the orders we've been given. If you don't leave the park immediately, we'll have no choice but to forcibly remove you." The family exchanged bewildered looks, their hearts sinking with the realization that they were once again being targeted by Karen's vindictive behavior. "This is outrageous," the father exclaimed, his voice booming across the park. "We've done nothing wrong, and we're not going anywhere until you can provide a legitimate reason for this harassment." The ranger's eyes darted around nervously, and he tugged at the collar of his uniform. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm just following orders. If you don't leave, we'll have to call the police." As the family prepared to stand their ground, a sinking feeling of dread began to set in. They knew that Karen was the driving force behind this latest incident, and they feared that her relentless campaign to rid the park of their presence was only just beginning. The family stood their ground, their eyes narrowed with determination as they confronted the park rangers. The father, his broad shoulders squared, stepped forward, his voice firm and unwavering. "Look, I don't know what kind of game Karen is playing, but we have done nothing wrong. We have a valid permit to be here, and we're not going to be bullied out of this park just because she doesn't like the way we look." The ranger shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between the family and the clipboard in his hand. "I understand your frustration, sir, but I'm just following orders. We've received a complaint that your picnic is in violation of several park regulations, and we're required to investigate and take appropriate action." The father let out a humorless laugh. "Appropriate action? You mean forcibly removing a law-abiding family from a public park because some entitled busybody doesn't like the way we look? I'm sorry, but that's not going to fly." The ranger's brow furrowed, and he seemed to hesitate, the conflict etched on his face. "Look, I don't want to make this any more difficult than it has to be. If you just pack up and leave, we can avoid any further confrontation." The mother, who had been quietly observing the exchange, stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and defiance. "We're not going anywhere. This is a public park, and we have every right to be here. If you try to remove us, we'll have no choice but to file a formal complaint and take legal action." The ranger's shoulders slumped, and he let out a heavy sigh. "I understand, ma'am, but my hands are tied. I'm just following orders, and if you don't leave, I'll have to call the police." The family exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of frustration and determination. They knew that they were facing a formidable foe in Karen, and they were prepared to fight tooth and nail to defend their right to enjoy the park. As the standoff continued, the sound of sirens in the distance made the family's hearts race. They braced themselves for the arrival of the police, knowing that the confrontation was about to escalate. Meanwhile, in her elegant home, Karen sat back in her chair, a smug grin plastered across her face. She had orchestrated this entire scenario, using her connections and influence to ensure that the park rangers would do her bidding. "Let's see how they like being the ones who are forcibly removed," she murmured, her fingers drumming against the desk. As the flashing lights of the police cars drew closer, the family knew that they were facing a battle unlike any they had ever experienced. But they were determined to stand their ground, no matter the cost. The flashing lights of the police cars cut through the dusk, casting an eerie glow over the tense standoff in the park. The family stood their ground, their expressions a mix of defiance and trepidation, as the officers emerged from their vehicles, their faces set in grim determination. "All right, folks, let's try to keep this civil," one of the officers said, his hand resting on the holster of his sidearm. "We've received a report of a disturbance, and we're here to restore order." The father stepped forward, his broad shoulders squared, his voice firm and unwavering. "Officer, we're not the ones causing a disturbance here. We're a family enjoying a picnic in a public park, and we have every right to be here." The officer's brow furrowed, and he glanced down at the clipboard in his hand. "Well, according to the information we've received, your picnic is in violation of several park regulations. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to pack up and leave the premises." The father's eyes narrowed, and he let out a humorless laugh. "That's ridiculous. We have a valid permit, and we've been nothing but respectful of the other park guests. This is nothing more than harassment, and we won't stand for it." The officer's expression hardened, and he took a step closer to the family. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to cooperate, or we'll be forced to remove you by force." The mother, sensing the rising tension, stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Officer, please, we don't want any trouble. We're just a family trying to enjoy a peaceful afternoon in the park. Why are you doing this?" The officer's gaze softened momentarily, but he quickly hardened his expression. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I have my orders. If you don't leave willingly, we'll have no choice but to arrest you for trespassing." The family exchanged anguished glances, their hearts racing with a mixture of fear and indignation. They knew that they were facing a formidable foe in the form of Karen's relentless campaign to drive them out of the park, and they were determined to stand their ground. As the officers moved in, the father stepped forward, his voice booming across the park. "This is an outrage. We're not going anywhere, and if you try to remove us, we'll file a lawsuit against the park and the police department for discrimination." The officer's eyes narrowed, and he reached for his handcuffs. "Sir, I'm warning you. Resist, and you'll be arrested." The family braced themselves, their faces etched with a mixture of defiance and dread, as the confrontation reached a fever pitch. They knew that the stakes were high, and that the outcome of this battle could have far-reaching consequences. As the tension in the park reached a boiling point, a new voice suddenly cut through the chaos, commanding the attention of everyone present. "Hold it right there, officers." Everyone turned to see a tall, well-dressed man striding toward them, his face etched with a stern expression. The family's eyes widened with recognition. It was the father's colleague, a prominent civil rights attorney. "What's going on here?" the attorney demanded, his gaze sweeping across the scene. The lead officer hesitated, his hand still gripping the handcuffs. "Sir, we've received a report of a disturbance in the park. This family is in violation of several regulations, and we're here to remove them." The attorney's brow furrowed, and he turned to the family, his expression softening. "Is that true?" The father shook his head vehemently. "Absolutely not. We have a valid permit, and we've done nothing wrong. This is nothing more than harassment, orchestrated by a woman named Karen, who has been trying to drive us out of this park since we arrived." The attorney's eyes narrowed, and he turned to the officers, his voice stern. "I see. Well, I can assure you that this family is here legally, and any attempt to remove them would be a clear violation of their civil rights. If you proceed with this, I'll have no choice but to file a lawsuit against the park and the police department for discrimination." The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the tension palpable in the air. Finally, the lead officer let out a heavy sigh and nodded. "All right, I understand. We'll leave you be, but I'm warning you, if there's any more trouble, we'll have to intervene." As the officers retreated, the family let out a collective sigh of relief, their faces etched with gratitude and disbelief. The attorney stepped forward, a warm smile spreading across his face. "I'm glad I could be of assistance. I've been following this situation with Karen, and I knew I had to intervene before things escalated further. The father clasped the attorney's hand, his grip firm. Thank you, my friend. We owe you a debt of gratitude. This woman has been relentless in her efforts to drive us out of this park, and we were starting to lose hope. The attorney nodded, his expression turning serious. Well, you can rest assured that we're not going to let her get away with this. I'll be filing a formal complaint with the Park Association, and if necessary, we'll take this all the way to court. As the family settled back onto their picnic blanket, a sense of relief and determination washed over them. They knew that the battle with Karen was far from over, but they were buoyed by the knowledge that they had a powerful ally in their corner. Meanwhile, Karen sat in her home, her fingers trembling with anger and frustration. She had been so close to victory, only to have it snatched away by the arrival of the civil rights attorney. With a scream of utter rage, she hurled her glass of wine against the wall, the shattered fragments a testament to the depth of her fury. This isn't over, she growled, her eyes glinting with a dangerous determination. I'll find a way to get rid of that family, even if it's the last thing I do. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the family continued their picnic, their laughter and joy a defiant contrast to the darkness that lurked in Karen's heart. They knew that the battle was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their determination to defend their right to exist in this world.